Okay.
Thank you.
So first of all, you have been working at the Environmental Defense Center for many, many years and taken on this huge task. I use the term David and Goliath with you. Those of us who have any sense of the biblical reference know it's the little guy up against the behemoth. And in your case, it has to do with Exxon as the behemoth and oil drilling in the Santa Barbara Channel. And that's a big task that you've taken on. So I guess I just want to start by saying thank you for being willing to do that.
Well, that's what EDC is all about. And that's why we were formed after the 1969 oil spill, was really to be the voice of the community and to empower the community to stand up to the giants like the oil industry that caused the 69 spill. And one of our very first cases was before my time, was defeating a liquefied natural gas project proposed off of Point Conception. And everyone thought that was a done deal. You had the political support, but EDC was able to stop that project. And since then, over the last almost 50 years, we've had many successes against the oil and gas and energy industries. So we have a lot of tools at our disposal. One of the silver linings of the 69 oil spill was that almost all the environmental protection laws that we use to this day were passed because of that oil spill, both at the state level and at the federal level. And those are the laws and the tools that we use to this day to defeat oil projects, gas power plants, other LNG projects. And I'm just really proud of EDC for standing up for
Mhm.
communities.
So for a lot of people, the 1969 is kind of, we know it because Earth Day came out of that, and now that's a national movement. We should all be very proud in Santa Barbara that that was a springboard for something that's become global. And then there was the 2015 oil spill, and people specifically remember that. And I know you were there on the beach. Could you just talk about what that was like for you to go there and see what was happening?
Well, we got a call that afternoon. The oil spill occurred in the morning. I got a call in the afternoon from a retired firefighter for the county who used to work in the county's oil spill response program. And he had been surfing that morning at Refugio State Beach Park. And so he was there when the oil spill was first discovered. And he was horrified because the response was not immediately deployed. So you had this oil spilling out of this culvert onto the beach and it's in the ocean and nothing was happening. Everyone was standing around waiting for the Coast Guard to show up. And he knew because of his previous work that they were supposed to be, containing the oil, make sure it's not entering the ocean and, getting on the beaches. And yet nothing was happening. So he called me and said, you got to get over here. And I said, well, I can't get there because they're blocking public access. They evacuated the park. And he said, well, you're with the Environmental Defense Center, you should be there. And so, we were able to get access and we were there all afternoon and evening. And it was traumatizing because we could see just this, the ocean was just full of this thick, foamy black oil. And it went into the ocean, and then every little wave brought it up onto the beach. So the beach was coated. It really stunk. And we saw the ship that helps with offshore oil spills. I forget what it's called now. It used to be called Clean Seas. But it was sitting like way offshore. Well, it
Hmm.
couldn't do anything because the oil spill was from onshore. So you had this ship that did show up but couldn't do anything. And I remember there was one guy in a hazmat suit walking on the beach, and everyone else was kind of waiting for their orders, waiting for equipment to show up, vessels to show up. And the Coast Guard captain showed up in the early evening, and the agency folks were meeting, and then about 9 o'clock they did a press conference. And so by then, a lot of national media showed up, and we were there this entire time. And so, the media were asking, like, what's the plan?
Mhm.
How are you going to deal with this? And the Coast Guard captain, who was head of the Unified Command overseeing the oil spill response, said, well, now it's dark, it's night, and
Oh.
wait for the morning and we'll come up with a plan. Well, I knew, having worked in this field for, decades, that they had a plan.
Hmm.
Every oil and gas facility, whether it's a platform or a refinery or a pipeline, has to have an oil spill contingency plan. What's going to happen if there's an accident? They had a plan that first morning. They just didn't use it.
Hmm.
And so I was, the media's, taking notes saying, oh, okay, they're going to come up with a plan in the morning. And I'm trying to raise my hand at this press conference saying, there is a plan. Why wasn't it followed? But,
Mhm.
of course, I wasn't part of the media. But really, the main response didn't start till almost 24 hours after the spill. And
And
that's why
why
so much oil spilled into the ocean.
and why didn't they react more quickly if they did have that plan? What was going on?
Well, we have changed the regulations since then, just like with the 69 oil spill that launched, a lot of new requirements legally. With the 2015 spill, we also learned that we needed even stricter laws and regulations. So we worked with our representatives to improve the laws and regulations. So now if there's an oil spill, like what happened in 2015, the Santa Barbara County Fire Department, which was the first on the scene, they were there almost immediately. Now, under the new regulations, the Santa Barbara County Fire Department can initiate the oil spill response.
Hmm.
So, that would have happened like right away. The other thing that caused so much oil to spill unnecessarily is that the owner of the pipeline at the time, Plains All American Pipeline Company, did not shut off the pipeline right away. So there were two factors here. The first was that Plains did not shut down the pipeline for a couple hours. It should have been shut down immediately. So that allowed more oil to be released from the pipeline. If they had shut down the pipeline right away, the oil may never have reached the ocean. But it was flowing for a couple hours. So that was the first problem. And then the second problem was that the agencies didn't respond right away to contain the oil. Um, and so it basically just went into the ocean, and then, ended up some of it traveling 150 miles down the
Yeah.
California coast.
Staggering amount. And well, we'll get in a moment to what's possibly happening or threatening to happen now. But I'm curious about you. And when did you decide you cared about the environment? What was your, first kind of connection, emotional, personal, intellectual, whatever connection to environmental work?
I'd say, nothing, like not just one, experience that stands out for me, but I definitely grew up loving nature. And my parents also exposed us to Native American culture, and I was really inspired by how Native Americans view our relationship with nature. So I always had the love of nature, and valued nature as such an important part of my life. And then I grew up with a mom who was very, very politically and socially active. And so she had me, going to rallies and working on campaigns and everything since I was probably 5 years old. And she was more focused on social issues, especially education and civil rights. And so when I got to UCSB, the two merged because UCSB was, where one of the first environmental studies programs in the country was formed, and so focused on the environment. And there was that's when that LNG project off of Point Conception was proposed. So at UCSB, I combined my love of nature with my activism background, and it was just, It was effortless and just really stroked my passion.
Yeah. And then you decided at some point, well, before that, you may have been involved in the environmental work, but eventually you decided to get a law degree. Why did you do that? That was a lot of work. What made you think the law was a good avenue for your passion?
Well, I teach environmental law at UCSB, and I tell my students that I'm an accidental lawyer. Unlike some people who know they want to be a lawyer, I wanted to be an environmental advocate. So from my 4 years at UCSB, being an activist and then continuing to volunteer in the community on environmental issues after I graduated, I realized I wanted to make a career of environmental advocacy, and I didn't know how to approach that. So friends of mine from the environmental studies program kept suggesting that I talk to Mark McGinnis, who taught environmental law at UCSB at the time. Unknown to me, he also founded the Environmental Defense Center. So when I met with him and he heard about what I wanted to do with my life, he said, "Oh, well, you should be an environmental lawyer and maybe you can come work at the Environmental Defense Center." And my first reaction was, "Oh my God, I don't want to go to law school. I don't have the time, the
Those
money."
big fat books in those days, right?
But he really just, he helped me see that that was a path to get me where I wanted to be. And by then I had seen, him at hearings, and I had seen that, oh, the decision makers, they do listen to the lawyers more than they listen to, the general public. And so he offered me an internship at the Environmental Defense Center. And so I went to the Santa Barbara College of Law so that I could see if this is what I wanted to do. And I interned, throughout my time in law school at the EDC, and I just loved it. And it inspired me to continue my legal studies. And that's when I got into the oil issues, because one of the first cases I worked on as a law clerk here was trying to stop Chevron from installing its platforms off the Gaviota coast and building that big processing plant at Gaviota. And I remember, someone just put this EIR, environmental impact report, in front of me and said, "Here, review this." And I said, "Okay."
How did that case turn out?
Well, the plant, the platforms did get installed, the plant got built, but because of the environmental pressure, the pressure from the environmental community, the county did adopt some stronger policies, including, ironically, the requirement for oil to be shipped out of the county by pipeline.
Uh,
And that led to the All-American Pipeline being built, because previous to that project, oil companies would produce oil and gas offshore, and they would bring that oil and gas onshore by pipeline to be processed, meaning they separate the oil and gas. And then the oil has to be refined, and we don't have refineries here. So before that Chevron project, all the oil would leave the county to go to refineries by barges and tankers,
Wow.
which was a huge risk. And, we had the Valdez oil spill. And so two things came out of the Chevron case. One was the requirement that the county would no longer allow barging or tankering. So that stopped. And the other one was that they had to comply with the county's air quality rules. So they had to, result in a reduction of their air emissions in the county. So, there were a couple things that
There were
came
some
out.
good things that came out of it. And then you've been involved in a lot of different cases over the years. You want to just mention a few of them and maybe a standout? I'm sure they all stand out, but
Well, I am very excited about, our cases involving oil and gas, issues because of climate change and oil spills, et cetera. And also how they impact our communities. They tend to impact, the most vulnerable among us. I would say probably the most impactful case I worked on was one that we came up with an idea for the state to be able to challenge 40 federal oil leases. So these were leases that were
Mm.
granted by the federal government more than 3 miles offshore. Out of the 83 leases that had been granted by the federal government, about half of them, or 40, were not developed yet.
Mm.
And so we initiated a legal theory that the State Coastal Commission and governor joined us in to terminate those 40 leases so they could never be developed. So basically, we got rid of half of the potential oil and gas development off the coast of California.
That's pretty good.
And that case went up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal, and we won.
Mm.
So it's a great example of the fact that so many of our victories are things people don't see and they don't know about. People don't know we could have had twice as many platforms off of our coast.
So, Linda, that takes me to the next question, which is how many platforms are there? How many are still working? How many are in the process of being decommissioned? People think in Santa Barbara, I've spoken to many folks and who say, "Oh, there's no oil drilling anymore. Those platforms are over and done. They're history." And maybe you can clear that up for us.
There are over 20 platforms, and most of them in our area. There's a few down south, but most of them are in the Santa Barbara Channel area. And 8 of them, about a third of them, are no longer producing. And so when that happens, then they have to enter into what's called the decommissioning phase. So when these platforms were installed, the oil companies agreed that when they finished extracting the oil and gas, that they would then remove everything and restore the ocean to its natural condition. Now they want to leave the platforms there, save money by leaving them there or leaving them partly there. And under current law, they can apply to do that, but they have to show that that would be better for the marine environment than removing them completely. And the federal government just completed an environmental evaluation looking at different decommissioning options from fully removing the platforms to partially removing them, and determined that the best for the marine environment was full removal.
Mm.
So right now, there's 8 that are permanently shut down. 6 of them are entering the decommissioning phase. The first one will be Platform Holly, which is right off of Elwood and UCSB. And we expect that decommissioning process to start early this year. So that platform has actually been shut down since the 2015 oil spill. Because
And who owns the 6 or the 8, I guess, and who's
so Platform Holly was owned most recently by Veneco.
Mm-hmm.
And when the 2015 spill happened, Platform Holly was shut down because there was no way to move the oil. The pipeline was shut down. Veneco then declared bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
And so now actually the state of California is responsible for Platform Holly. But fortunately, the prior owner was Mobil and still has obligations for decommissioning. So ExxonMobil is working with the state and paying for most of the cost of decommissioning the platform.
Mm-hmm.
But this will be the first test of decommissioning off of California in probably 30 years. So it's really important that people follow what's going to happen because it could set a precedent. Then the other platforms, there's 3 located off of the Gaviota Coast up north, the Point Conception platforms. Those are the ones that Chevron installed, and they are completely shut down as well. They will start going through the decommissioning process probably later this year. And then there's 2 that were also previously owned by Chevron that are pretty far offshore from Carpinteria, Gale and Grace. So of the 6 that are already going in the process, 5 are actually the responsibility of Chevron, and 1 is primarily the responsibility of ExxonMobil.
Is it fair to ask you how Chevron is doing as a fiduciary? Are they doing their job, or do we know yet?
As far as I know, they are. So the way this works is for an oil lease offshore, which is what gives an oil company, the right to explore and develop oil and gas. That's a contract with the state or the federal government. We own the ocean, the people do. The state government and the federal government, they oversee the uses on it, but they own it for us. The ocean is a public resource. So if they're going to issue a lease to someone to extract minerals, oil and gas, it has to have a benefit. And that's why we get royalty. We get some of the profits. But it also comes with some obligations. Like when you're done, you clean up whatever you've created. And when a company like Exxon or Mobil or Chevron wants to sell that lease to another company, which they do quite often, as when they're not making much money anymore, they'll hand off these leases to these smaller companies like Beneco, like Sable. And then the state or the federal government says, hey, we have a contract with you. We want to make sure that all the obligations under the contract are going to be fulfilled, including the decommissioning and the cleanup. So yeah, you can sell to a Beneco or a Sable, but you're going to be on the hook if they can't pay for the cleanup. So that's why, even though Beneco went bankrupt, ExxonMobil is still responsible.
Very interesting, and that may be relevant to the Sable offshore situation. That's a piece of the puzzle here. I was very surprised, as you know, when someone told me there was a possibility of the restart of oil drilling in Santa Barbara Channel, such that I told my friend that's not possible. That would never happen in Santa Barbara. The citizens of Santa Barbara would never let that happen. So what's happening? And I think you were one of the first people I sat down with and said, Linda, what's going on here? So
Remember that coffee?
yes, the handlebar
Yes.
bay. It was really good coffee, by the way.
Yes, I do remember. That's how we met. I think everybody is really up in arms about this. Like I tell people, this is not a hypothetical threat. This is not speculative. We had a major oil spill from this pipeline in 2015, and Sable wants to restart that same pipeline. So Sable bought the pipeline and the platforms and the processing facilities from ExxonMobil. And Sable wants to restart everything using the same pipeline that ruptured in 2015. No one ever thought that would happen. This pipeline is so corroded. It was designed poorly. It wasn't maintained. So when it was owned by its original owner, by Plains proposed to build a whole new pipeline that would be made out of different material, different design, would be safer. Plains actually applied to the county of Santa Barbara to build the new pipeline, and the county was preparing the environmental impact report. There were going to be hearings on it. But Sable wanted to take the fast track and didn't want to wait to get approvals and construct a whole new pipeline. So Sable decided, we're just going to restart the existing pipeline. And it's such a dangerous proposition. We know it's corroded. The county, as part of its environmental review, compared the risks of building a new pipeline versus restarting this one. And its experts determined that if this pipeline is restarted, and even if they put new valves on to detect leaks, it doesn't prevent a leak. So even with the new valves, the county experts determined that there was a risk of a spill every year, a rupture, like what happened in 2015, every 4 years, and that a spill could be almost twice the size of what happened in 2015. So we know what is likely to happen, and we know what the consequences are of that. So we're fighting this, aggressively. We're also concerned, about the fact that if this pipeline is restarted, that means that the platforms restart. And that's a huge risk to California and the nation, really, because it means, restarting fossil fuel production off of the coast. As Sable says, it would increase oil production in California by 20%.
Mm.
And that will interfere with our ability to meet our climate goals, our air quality goals. It will definitely mean that the county cannot meet its goals in its climate action plan because the greenhouse gas emissions will be so huge from this project, could possibly double all of the county's greenhouse gas emissions. So it's really a step backwards. And one thing I like to point out to people is we're all very, very worried about the Trump administration coming in and what that could mean for offshore oil development. In California, I think the biggest risk is the Sable project.
Even bigger than Trump.
I do, because the Trump administration is limited in what they can do off of California. First of all, one of the areas that has the most remaining oil and gas reserves is called the Santa Maria Basin, which is really between Point Conception and San Luis Obispo County border.
Mm-hmm.
We have a new National Marine Sanctuary there now.
Yeah.
So they can't drill there anymore. Also, during the first Trump administration, our state passed a law, in large part thanks to then Senator Hannah Beth Jackson, that prevents our state from approving any infrastructure that would support more federal oil and gas development. So if they need pipelines to come through state waters to shore, or if they need anything, onshore to support offshore oil and gas development in federal waters, that's no longer allowed. So we have a lot of protections in place from what Trump can do, and certainly he's going to try. But I think we have a lot of good protections in place. So to me, the biggest threat of offshore oil and gas off California is this Sable project.
Yeah. I think about all that Santa Barbara's been through with the fires and, with the questionable health of the air for a variety of reasons, and then piling into that air carbon. And what can you tell me about we don't know exactly the health impact, but we do know a lot more carbon would be in the air and what that does to health in general.
The risk of increasing the greenhouse gas or carbon emissions would have a direct impact. It could have a direct impact on public health. It also can have a direct impact. We're a coastal community, and so in terms of sea level rise, storm surges, we've already seen impacts from that. Increased wildfire risk, comes from climate change. We're certainly experiencing that. So there's a whole host of ways that we are being impacted. And I do applaud the county and the state for what they're trying to do. They both have very aggressive plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this project will blow that out of the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you started working on this Sable situation, there's so many different state agencies involved here, and probably the most responsive has been the Coastal Commission. What jurisdiction do they have, and what could they do?
The Coastal Commission has jurisdiction along with the county in what's called the coastal zone. So from 3 miles offshore to inland. It varies inland, but along the Gaviota Coast, it's roughly around where Highway 101 is, just so people can picture that. So the county of Santa Barbara has direct permit authority over development, including pipeline development. The Coastal Commission can step in if the county is not enforcing coastal protection laws, and that's what happened here. Sable started digging up the pipeline and doing some repairs, installing some valves, but in doing that, really disrupting coastal streams and wetlands and other habitats. And so the Coastal Commission, approached the county and said, you need to stop this. They need to apply for a permit, and you need to decide, if and how this work can be done to protect these resources. And the county threw up its hands and said that it had no jurisdiction, because it said that it was preempted by federal pipeline safety laws. Well, those don't preempt the county's authority to protect land resources.
Mm.
So the Coastal Commission stepped in
Mm.
and issued a notice requiring Sable to stop the work and come in and apply for a permit. So essentially, the Coastal Commission has stepped into the shoes of the county and said, okay, you need to come to us now. So that's great. So there's no work happening right now. And Sable has not applied yet. We're hoping that the Coastal Commission will also require a permit before the pipeline can be restarted. Because again, that will be the only way that there'll be a focus on specifically protecting these coastal resources and looking at things like, if there's an oil spill, what would that mean? And is that too dangerous? And should they go back to the idea of, proposing a whole new pipeline that would be potentially safer? So we're definitely pleased with the Coastal Commission and hope that they continue to be as vigilant as possible.
Seems like something happened there at the county where they were afraid of Exxon, or they were leaning more towards Exxon. I was kind of surprised that the environmental impact report and actually some of the financials were not robustly included and in the report from the staff to the commissioners, nor did the commissioners seem to drill down very deeply into those issues.
We were shocked at the lack of in-depth review. You're referring to the Planning Commission hearing allowing Sable to take over ExxonMobil's county permits for the pipeline and processing plants. And that's a big decision. And because I had mentioned before that, these large oil companies that originally had these leases like the Exxons and Chevrons and such, they eventually sell off to these smaller companies. Because it's not worth it to them anymore, but to a small company, it can be worth it. And so the county was worried about that. Could these smaller companies safely operate these massive oil facilities? And so the county developed an ordinance that requires the county to approve transferring any permits from the seller to the buyer. And that's what the issue was at the Planning Commission. And so we argued that the county should not transfer the permits to Sable because it doesn't have the financial resources to safely operate these facilities or respond to an oil spill. It doesn't even have approved oil spill contingency plans. It keeps submitting deficient ones. It hasn't shown that it can safely operate. It has notices of violations from not just the California Coastal Commission, but now also the Regional Water Quality Control Board. They violated the Clean Water Act as well. They haven't shown that they have adequate insurance or bonds, and the county staff didn't require them to show all of these things and said, oh, it's really just, it's kind of a paper transfer. It's okay. But it's not okay because Sable is in debt. Sable borrowed almost $800 million from Exxon to buy this project. They have no other asset. They have no other revenue. If they start operating, first of all, we don't know if they have enough money to operate safely when things go right. But if there is an oil spill, they don't have the money to deal with that. We know that the 2015 spill cost Plains $750 million. Sable doesn't have that. And unlike the decommissioning that stays with the seller, Exxon will have no responsibility for
right. So this backup by Exxon isn't there in this case. Why not? I mean, if it was true with the others.
So the reason Exxon hangs on to the responsibility for decommissioning is because Exxon put those platforms there. So Exxon has to make sure they come out in an appropriate manner. For an oil spill, that's not Exxon's fault. That's Sable's fault. If there's an oil spill on Sable's watch, it's probably due to their negligence, like it was with Plains. So they are responsible. They're not going to have the money to clean it up, to contain it, to reimburse people.
And am I right? There were some of the same people involved in Plains as there are in Sable offshore, you don't have to name the names if you don't want, but it
So
looked like
there was
it
a
was.
separate company called PXP, Plains Exploration Production, that operated three platforms that are now permanently shut down.
Hmm.
That's a different company than the Plains All-American Pipeline. It is true that Sable's executives come from some other oil companies that have worked in our area, but that doesn't mean, if you look at their financial filings with the Securities Exchange Commission, we know that they're in debt. We know they don't have money to operate these facilities, and we know that they don't have money to respond to an oil spill.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't usually look at financial recommendations for buy or sell in the financial markets, but I did happen to see that there was a sell recommendation recently for Sable Offshore from one advisor. Yeah, they think it's not a good bet. So
Hmm.
who knows where that might go? That's one. Now I have just a couple more questions here. First of all, I know you've put together a coalition of other organizations, and that's always important when you do something like this, that you have friends and collaborators and colleagues. And how's that going?
We have a very effective and sophisticated coalition. I should have stated earlier, as a law firm, we have clients.
Mhm.
So the Environmental Defense Center represents Get Oil Out, which was formed on the beaches during the 1969 oil spill. We also represent a county watchdog organization called Santa Barbara County Action Network, and we represent our own members. But we work in a coalition that includes the Sierra Club and Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, Center for Biological Diversity, Surfrider Foundation, and others. So we're a very close coalition, and we've already been successful to some extent because Sable, in trying to attract investors, said that it was going to restart all of these facilities in September last year, and then October, and then December. Now they're saying, early 2025. Well, they still are shut down because of the Coastal Commission. We
Mhm.
still don't have approvals from many other agencies. So, we keep submitting information to these agencies. So it was our environmental analyst, our resident biologist, essentially, that surveyed the entire route when Plains was conducting its unpermitted work. And then we sent reports to not just the Coastal Commission, but to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Regional Water Board. And that's what, resulted in all of these notices of
Yeah.
violation and stop work orders. So, our enforcement work is having an effect.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you have a pretty good team, small though it may be there at the EDC. Do you want to just share a little bit about who they are and what they do?
Sure. We have an amazing team. And, we are small but mighty. You know, we have defeated the likes of Exxon and Chevron and BHP Billiton and, NRG, largest energy company. We have defeated all of them on various projects, and yet we're quite small. So we have four attorneys, and the other attorney here that's doing a lot of the work on this case it's very coincidental. His name is Jeremy Frankel, and we hired him last April. But he happened to have been visiting the region in 2015, and he and his wife were camping at Refugio State Beach Park the day of the oil spill. So they got evacuated
Wow.
from Refugio, and now here it is, 10 years later, and he's a lawyer working on the case.
That
Um,
must be emotionally satisfying for him to go.
yes.
Yeah. And then who else do you have?
So Brian Troutwine is our in-house biologist. He grew up here. He knows every single plant and animal and creek. And so, as I mentioned, he has surveyed, the entire route of the pipeline, and he knows exactly what's at stake. So he's working on this case with us. And then we've hired a couple experts. We've hired a pipeline safety expert and also an expert on oil supply economics.
Mm.
And then our executive director, Alex Katz, and our communications director, Betsy Weber, have been really involved in helping us, try to engage the public and educate people about what's happening, spread the word. We've had some webinars, we've had some rallies and press conferences, but trying to keep people apprised of the risks and help them elevate their voices.
Yeah, fantastic. And so in closing, I bet your mom was pretty proud of you in the end.
Yes, yes.
She
Yeah,
should.
she's no longer with us, but
Yeah.
she was very
Oh,
supportive.
they leave the planet, but they're still with us, right?
Yes. Well, she co-founded the League of Women Voters in her town,
Mhm.
and then was here when our League of Women Voters gave me an environmental award, and so that was probably one of the happiest days of her life.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember we were both awarded uh Women of the Year from Hannah Beth Jackson. There were four of us, and I just remember meeting you. You don't remember this. I was at the other end of the little lineup at the event, and I'm thinking, she's amazing. So that was
That's
like,
a great story. I need to
yeah.
find those. Do you have those pictures?
I think they're somewhere, buried in Google. If we look around, maybe we'll find them.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe we can do a lineup again. Well, thank you for taking the time, and I'll put something
Thank
together.
you.
Um, and then we'll carry on in all the different ways that we can, because it's
Thank
so
you
great to
so
be
much.
in the trenches. See,
Thank you, Vicki, and thanks for all your leadership on this issue.
thanks. Okay, you take care.
Bye.
Bye.